Hi everyone, welcome back to lecture 4 of this course on Sociology of Media and Communication. So far we have been talking about the idea of the public sphere and the counter public, and today we are going to move to what the public sphere transforms into. So, we have been looking at the historical structural transformation of the public sphere, where there is an understanding that from a rational critical public, there is a transformation into a more consumerist, passive oriented society. So, how do we then understand this society? So, this lecture I have titled Popular Culture, Public Culture and Media, to talk about how then we understand the two words culture and public, especially in relationship to media and communication. Now, culture is actually one of those words which have been widely theorized and conceptualized in human society, and there are multiple meanings associated with the word culture. For instance, it could be the process of human training, it could be the state of intellectual growth, it could also be a whole way of life as people have described it. There are also certain ways in which there are levels of cultures which are used to distinguish between cultures, and one of the most commonly known levels is popular or mass culture. When we think about popular or mass culture, theorization has meant it not in a very good way. There is actually an implied otherness in the usage of the term popular culture, which is used in opposition to an implied elite or unpopular culture. So, when we think about high culture, or when we think about cultures which are of elite societies and groups, they are seen as niche in the sense that they are restrictive. So, there is no sense of popular attached to it. Stuart Hall argues that this idea of what would be the popular culture is actually also in that sense reflective of how hierarchies of culture are drawn. The changes in the definition of how culture is related to the idea of popular culture also has the emergence of the United States of America as a global power. It changed from high culture to American mainstream popular culture when we start thinking about culture and its forms and the way that mass culture is image mediated in several technological forms. Now, one of the ways in which the United States of America has exerted its supremacy is not only through hard power, it is also through what would be called soft power. This soft power is rooted in the popularity of their popular culture, be it their very famous music or films or food products, etc. For instance, George Ritzer talks about the McDonaldization of society, where the idea of McDonald's, which is a popular fast food chain, becomes very mainstream in almost all societies. So, there is a way in which there is popularization of cultural products and forms. For instance, the pair of denim jeans that most of us wear, again a symbol of America's soft power. In today's context, when we think about, for instance, let us say the Korean drama wave and the popularity of Korean cultural products, which is also called the Hallyu wave, it is actually a symbol of their soft power. The same thing goes for Japan and Japanese food, the manga culture, anime, etc., where you see an emergence of a popular culture. These mass cultures and popular cultures, however, are seen as a threat to the moral fabric of social life, primarily connected to how it puts in danger civilized values. What this means is that the ideas of popular culture, the ideas of mass culture are also tied to masses who are non-critical. Historically, when we have thought about popular culture, the culture of masses who are illiterate or literate but untrained in reading, and how their cultural ideas become a product of society are seen as popular culture. So, it is connected to low taste and habit. Popular culture is also seen as rooted in people's experiences, pleasures, memories and customs. For instance, some of the songs that may be played in for a wedding ceremony, or forms of theatre, forms of dance, forms of music which may not have classical training, they would be categorized as popular culture. Popular culture has also been viewed as problematic within the larger discourse of cultural debate, where the popular is constituted by people from different social backgrounds, but then they are seen as not contributing to rational critical public debate. This equalization of popular culture as mass culture is also connected to the idea that these forms of popular culture as mass produced, they are thoughtless and they are unsophisticated and hollow in nature. Now, Theodor Adorno had made a distinction between art and popular. He suggests that culture as a product of industrialization, which created mass cultural products, is popular, it is not art. So, when we think about popular culture, the idea that is generally conveyed is that it is a product of mass and crass commercialization, which primarily is what the public sphere has transformed into. Interestingly, when we think about popular culture, it also takes us to this discussion on how different social groups may have different ideas of good and bad culture, and culture is also about material habits, fields of dispute and struggles among classes. So, if your popular culture has the acceptability among a larger audience, it also indicates the sense of your power. For instance, if Korean films, Korean food are in the craze and people like them, it is also indicative of the strength and power that Korea as a nation possesses. So, this battle about popular culture is also a battle for power. In this context, let us take a look at what Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist and the author of Distinction, has to say in terms of how popular culture is a reflection of one's social identity. So, he understands taste in things like food, clothes, music, etc., is an indicator of one's identity, which is determined by their social origins. So, when we think about primarily the way that culture reproduces social structures and power relations, it is through people's tastes. So, in a way, there are also systems of control in place for almost all forms of cultural practices. So, when we think about social origin and educational background, they determine what an individual's taste looks like. For instance, he gave this example of what the popularity of jazz music meant vis-a-vis light music, and the popularity of jazz music underscores the way that it is interlinked to a particular section of elite society that likes or prefers that music. Taste functions as a marker of class, which binds and also splits people. It binds people who have the same taste, but it excludes others who may not have the same taste. So, when we think about taste and its aesthetic disposition and character, this is historical, this is relational and differential. So, art and cultural consumption actually end up legitimizing social differences. In this context, let us actually talk a little bit about how primarily we can understand this relationship between taste and capital. So, when we are thinking about Pierre Bourdieu and this idea of taste, it is also important to think about how he expands the idea of capital beyond economic capital to think about cultural and social capital. So, the kind of music that you might like, the kind of theatre that you might want to watch, the kind of aesthetic decoration of your house, all of it depends on this capital that you bring with yourself, and this capital is not just economic in nature, it is also socially and culturally determined. So, when we are thinking about, let us say for instance, the kind of school one goes to, again it is an indicator of the person's parents and families socialization, their understanding of how capital itself functions through networks and information, etc. That then is replicated through what they do in their higher education as well as then in their occupational life. Now, this understanding of what actually your capital means is directly connected to then how your taste is constructed, as we have been discussing. In one sense then, art and cultural consumption therefore are not asocial or apolitical, they are very much culturally socially embedded. For instance, if one looks at forms of theatrical performance, one would suggest that certain forms of theatre are seen as superior than others. For instance, in the past, when we think about classical Sanskrit drama, which is one of the oldest forms of theatre, as I had also mentioned in the first lecture in this course, one will see that the audience mainly consisted of either the royal patronage groups or very elite members of society. However, with the gradual transformation to folk culture, folk music and then more popular culture, you find more democratic involvement. Whereas classical music, dance, theatre, etc. continue to remain very high culture in its taste, when it comes to these popular cultural forms, they are more about the mass society. They are rooted in products of how the mass engages with these forms. For instance, therefore, when one thinks about street plays or folk plays and the various performances of Ram Leela and Ras Leela that happen across the country, one will see that these are all folk forms of performance with huge audience engagement. These are not in that sense very elite forms of culture. Now, the popular culture that is primarily a part of these modern democratic societies is also disseminated through commercial channels and shaped by market forces. So, very often we watch a particular content, let us say in a serial in the television, and we wonder that why is this being telecasted? The answer clearly lies in the market forces and how these market forces are understood by the producers. So, when any content which is popular is created, one of the driving forces behind it is the profit motive, and what it also caters to is mass production, that there should be in that sense mass engagement with the content. So, when content is created, if it is niche content, the target also is niche, but if it is popular culture, popular content, then the idea is that there should be mass engagement. So, this formation of how we understand popular culture is very closely related to the transformation of the nature of the public, and of course, forms of media and communication have played a very crucial role in it. How do we think about popular culture and public culture? So, popular culture is also public culture in a way where there is a particular public which consumes popular or mass culture and is actually part of the public culture instead of the public sphere. The reason being that the public sphere is seen as a site of rational critical debate, whereas the public culture is more about consumerism. Now, this public culture, a concept developed by Arjun Appadurai and Carol Breckenridge, is also an arena of cultural debate where there are contestations within the public culture itself, and there are anxieties and ambiguities between national, global, regional cultural processes, especially as seen in the Indian context. Let me give you an example. For instance, if one thinks about different kinds of folk art forms and performance forms in different parts of the country, one will see that the folk forms retain certain features of their region, incorporate some features which are national and also global. So, it is an arena, a space where they are mediating these ideas between the tradition and the modern, and it is a disputed space where negotiations take place. These negotiations could be of meanings, ethics, ways of life, and they are participated through local social actors who have conflicting ideas of who they are and who they can become. For instance, if one looks at how regional films are made, it is a very interesting site to understand this public culture, precisely also because it is an arena of understanding the intersection between the regional, the national and the global forces. So, if a film is made in Assamese, it also has characteristics which make it an Indian film as well as some global features. It, for instance, may be shot in the UK or in France to give it a global character to bring in those aesthetics, but the story could remain to be local and Assamese in this context. So, this public culture actually is a very interesting arena to also observe how masses behave. For instance, Sara Dickey in her work on Tamil films talk about how when citizens and people watch films in southern parts of India, particularly in Tamil Nadu, they are also engaging in consuming a sense of utopia. This utopia is something which is rooted in non-reality, primarily because what is being fed to the masses and the viewers is this idea of a fantasy that makes you free from your stresses and tensions that modern life inevitably brings in. So, the role of public culture is actually to facilitate the idea of popularity and mass culture. So, in one sense, when we think about culture and public opinion, it is shaped by locational factors, in that sense that when we think about 1990s, there is an assertion of nationalist ideas, there is economic liberalization, there is mass consumerism, there is also a rapid spread of new media. The consumer economy caters to a growing middle class and also an avalanche of advertisements. You have the greatest reach of popular culture in the 21st century. There are television serials where Hindu epics, mythological epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata are televised, basically attracting huge audiences. The public becomes a zone of cultural contestation where modernity can be understood as a very differently experienced phenomena. So, while we all are part of a modern society, the modernity that we are experiencing, it's a very, very different phenomena, and what public culture does is provides us a better understanding of a range of phenomena which you could be seeing as modern, mediated and politically significant. So, this is also the period where you see very local indigenous meanings of modernity and how modernity in itself in Indian context is public, primarily through the construction of ideas of what it means to be modern. For instance, again when we think about the role of the media and when we discuss television, we will talk a little bit more about it. You see how the state wants particular ideas of modernity being conveyed through the state campaigns and the serials also that are broadcasted. Similarly, when the state promotes an idea of controlling population and they suggest that you should have 2 children, it is also an idea of modernity. This modernity is being told to us, communicated to us through the ideas of mass media. So, in that era, for instance, these ads, these ideas of modernity would be communicated to us through television ads, radio ads or in the newspapers, as well as several boardings and hoardings which you could see on the roads. Interestingly, if this was a digital campaign, you would have found a lot of content on social media with the same messaging. So, interestingly, one sees how ideas of identity, ideas of religion, how ideas of nationalism, gender, questions of caste, class, they find a place in this arena of what would be called the public culture. However, at the same time, they continue to be categorized as what would be popular forms of culture. So, as I was saying, films and television serials are very crucial in this construction of the middle class identity, along with the values of consumerism and leisure. So, there is a pan-Indian reach of the nation as an imagined community, as Benedict Anderson would argue, and you see every site as a possibility where Indian modernities are made public, but there are also disagreements. So, why do these disagreements exist in terms of what modernity means in the Indian context? The disagreements also exist primarily because India is a diverse country and therefore, there are different ways of how modernity and traditions are interpreted. One also sees role of art forms like television serials, photographs, storytelling, theatre, etc., taking on different meanings in this period. Abu Ligod's study of television in Egypt looks at how the serials were seen as a tool for national change as well as political mobilization. Similar observations have been made about television content in the Indian context, and we will talk about it as we discuss television as a form of media. So, in this particular study by Abu Lila Ligod, she is looking at how the state plays a role in what kind of television serials are being telecasted or broadcasted. There is also a coming together of different modes and sites of cosmopolitan experiences. These experiences are dictated primarily also because India has had liberalization of the economy since 1990s, and it was possible for foreign brands, foreign actors to enter the Indian markets, and what then happened was also this idea that there was a transformation of one's experience. We had color television, we had pictures of live events, we had global events where Indians represented the country and brought us laurels. For instance, Aishwarya Rai and Sushmita Sen's victories in the respective beauty pageants. Interestingly, this modernity is also very consumerist, as you can see from what Habermas was talking about or Fraser was talking about in terms of rational critical debate spheres. We have become more and more consumerist. Therefore, there is also an intersection of what would be the public sphere and the public culture. Reason being that the public culture arena, where we have popular kind of culture, is a space where there is a possibility for resistance as well. So, we are in a stage of media and communication where we are negating that these binaries necessarily need to exist alone. On the other hand, we are also stressing on the fact that there could be intersections between the two understandings of the public, where there could be assertion of identities, where there could be rationality, criticality, but also consumerism. So, to sum up this lecture, what I have tried to talk about is popular culture as a leading form of global culture, which sort of makes us think about the public sphere in cultural ways with the plethora of various forms of mass and popular culture and entertainment that we find. There is an intersection between the counter public and the popular or public culture as well in many cases, which creates a form of media that not only reaches out and entertains the general public, but sometimes also presents critical debates. This arena is very fluid in nature as it integrates and divides at the same time. The rise of digital and network media with increasing awareness of the processes of inclusion and exclusion continue to redefine how we think about this public arena. And the public that we are thinking about emerges as a result of continuous process wherein different actors gradually become aware of each other. So, this awareness is also amplified by the digital media, because you have one section of society getting to know what is happening in the other. So, what we were thinking of in terms of these heterogeneous forms of modernity, different kinds of modernity, people, aspirations, etc., there is a plethora of it, primarily also through how we have communicative abundance, knowledge about each other. So, we are entering an arena where when we think about media and communication and this public sphere that has existed, it has changed in several ways. So, with this I will wind up this lecture on public culture, and in the next lecture we will continue from here. Thank you.